全程的录影，我们今天会全程的录影，所以如果您有一些介意的地方的话，请您在私下跟我们联络，看可以做什么样的处理。录影的话，我们之后可能会做公开或是私下的一些就是我们自己内部的使用，我们目前还没有确定，所以如果您有介意一些事情的话，请您赶快跟我们做联络一下。那今天的主讲是 Ken McCort， 大家已经看到他了，耶！然后今天的翻译是任真，他英文超级无敌好的，我觉得好安心哦。对，那么我们就把时间交给他们吧。
好。Also, Ken, Senna just introduced you and everyone else. And you may begin right now.
Okay, first off, I'd like to thank you all for being patient through this crisis, this epidemic that we humans have to learn to adapt to. And I look forward to not only talking with you today, but to do more in the future with trainers. I've kind of dedicated this part of my life, I'm 67 years old, so to making sure that the next generation of trainers don't make the mistakes that I did and some of my colleagues did. So I'm very pleased to be here.
大家好，我是 Ken。那首先要非常谢谢大家在这个疫情时代下非常严峻的时刻还这么有耐心，然后来参与今天的讨论会。那 Ken 我就直接用我，这样比较不会 Ken 来，然后我来去的。我的使命是想要培育下一代的年轻训犬师，无论你是训犬或是训练动物的任何训练师。那我今年已经67岁，所以我觉得我应该要把我的经验和我曾经犯过的错，想办法把它调整之后，让下一代的训练师不会犯同样的错。I'm done.
Okay. First off, I know there's an interest in land races, in what some people call feral dogs. And I kind of wanted to spend a little bit of time explaining, how these animals came to be.
第一个是我知道今天大家可能会有一些兴趣，想要来讨论地方品种或者是我们台湾浪犬的议题。那所以他会先来解释，所以我会先来解释从这个议题开始出发，跟大家聊一聊。
My experience with land races, which is the correct term for feral dogs, not only comes from an academic understanding of the evolution of these animals, but from also practically training and working with these animals, including I've owned a couple myself.
好，首先我想要先厘清一下，就是 land 就是地方品种这个名词。那我用地方品种的名词，是因为一般我们称的流浪犬，它在无论是从学术上的生态演化研究上，或是我自己在训练跟互动的经验上，他们都比较更正确的称呼是用地方品种，因为他们有一些统一的特性，所以以下都会用地方品种来取代流浪狗的称呼。
One of my good friends and mentors was a gentleman named Ray Coppinger, who's a PhD in animal behavior, who's specialized in land races.
那我的一个好朋友呢，叫 Ray Carpenter， 他刚好是动物行为的一个专家。那他有非常非常多的研究和学术经验，在研究地方品种犬。
I was privileged to not only know Ray, but I traveled with him for about 20 years, lecturing with him all over the world.
那在我曾经跟随他大概20年的时间，在各地巡回去做推广跟演讲。
And Ray was a biologist. He understood canines at a level that, I was learning. The reason that he had me along is that he constantly got questions from the audience about training, and he wasn't a trainer, he was a biologist.
那他把我带上路的原因呢，是因为Ray 他是一个生物学家，但是当他在演讲的过程中，非常非常多的听众都会一直问他关于动物行为跟动物训练的事情。
So to first kind of understand how this all fits together, I'm going to give you some stats on the population of dogs in the world.
好，所以要从头开始理解这个议题的话，我会先跟各位介绍一下，在整个世界中狗狗的一些数据的资料。
Scientists use algorithms now to figure out population densities.
That's pretty technical.
Okay, an algorithm is a computer generated formula that lets you arrive at some kind of mathematical number.
好，所以现代的科学家已经非常善用一些数学或是统计上的方式去统计世界上各地犬只族群的密度。
Going to different countries around the world and trying to actually count the number of, let's say, dogs that exist on that country would be ridiculous. You'd never come up with an accurate number.
那因为首先要做这样的研究，就是因为我们必须先了解全世界到底有多少狗，但是要实际到每一个国家去把所有的狗一只一只的数出来，这个事情是不太实际的，所以才会用不同的这种科学方法。
So the scientists have come up with these algorithms, these formulas that are based on a few things that we know about dogs and populations.
所以科学家就会开发出一些计算公式来估算，就是依据不同地方族群的一些特性去做出一个计算公式来估算那个地方大概有多少只的犬只族群。
Generally speaking, the closer you get to the equator, the more people and the more dogs you'll see on the planet.
好，那一个大致的趋势是，越靠近赤道的地方，人类的数量越多，同时狗的数量也会越多。
Unlike popular beliefs like Siberian Huskies and Alaskan Malamutes, there are no dogs in Alaska where the Malamute Indians live, and there are no dogs in Siberia.
不像刚刚的这种说法，就是越靠近赤道狗越多这个说法，可能会和一些传统的认知有所差异。有传统的认知，有些人会觉得说，在阿拉斯加啊，或者是比较北地的地方，会有很多的阿拉斯加犬啊，或者是雪橇犬啊等等的。其实在野外是没有这种状况的。
And I'm not saying there aren't any pet dogs up there, but as far as like working sled dogs, they don't exist in those areas.
就是说北部这些地方没有狗，不是说没有宠物狗，而是说在野外的野生的这种雪橇犬，其实不是在自然状态下是不会存在的。
And for the most of history, there haven't been any dogs up there.
而从历史上，从非常长的一个历史尺度来看，在极北的地方也从来没有狗的族群出现过。
You have to get down to Central Europe and Central Asia and into the middle of Canada before you're actually going to start seeing dog populations that aren't under the control of man.
野生狗的族群呢，通常假设我们从北极开始下来的话，可能要一路到中欧或是中亚，或者是加拿大的中部，才会开始看得到有野生狗族群的存在。
We also know that the population of dogs in a given area will go up as the population of people in that same area goes up. 然后
科学家另外知道的事实是呢， 当一个地方的人数量越多，狗的数量通常也会跟着往上增多。
And this isn't because these people are keeping more pet dogs. It's because humans generate a lot of garbage, and that's what feral populations live on.
好，那人越多，狗也越多的原因，并不一定是因为人饲养了越多的宠物，而是通常因为在人类生活的环境里面，人所制造出来的一些废弃资源会滋养这些野外的族群。
In fact, the general diet of landrace dogs is garbage, dead animals, and other animals' poop.
好，然后实际透过研究，我们也可以发现说，这些野生地方品种、野生族群的狗狗，它们主要的饮食包含了各式各样的人类不要吃的食物，或者是其他狗的粪便，或者是死掉的动物尸体。
Coprophagia, which is the technical word for animals that eat poop, is a normal behavior in dogs.
好，所以食粪这个行为在狗狗里面是非常正常的行为。
It's not socially acceptable to most people, but it is a normal behavior.
虽然这个行为对于大部分的人来说是无法被接受，社会观感不佳，但对狗来说它是非常正常的。
Parasite transmission and disease transmission from this particular behavior is not a very big problem for dog populations.
那因为透过食粪而人可能会担心说，透过食粪会导致一些寄生虫啊或是疾病的传染，但这个问题在狗狗的族群之间其实并不是非常严重。
The other parameter that is very important in dog populations across the planet is that the flatter the land is, the more dogs you'll find.
然后另外一个跟狗的数量相关的因素是地形的平坦程度，也就是说，一个地方如果它地势越平坦，狗的数量就会越多。
Also, in places where there are less venomous, especially reptiles, you'll find more dogs as well.
然后还有另外一个因素是，如果这个地方它的有毒类的动物，特别是有毒的爬虫类、两栖爬虫类动物越少的话，那个地方的狗的族群数量也会比较多一些。
So with that said, when scientists plug all this data into a computer and start trying to generate numbers, right now it's estimated that somewhere the number of dogs in the world right now is somewhere around 1 billion with a B dogs.
所以当科学家把刚刚提到那些因素，人口数量啊、地形啊、有没有有毒爬虫类啊等等的，全部放入踢进这个公式里面之后，他们估算出来全球的狗狗数量，野生的狗数量大约在10亿。
So that's a rough guesstimate, but it's based on some pretty good statistics.
好，那是一个非常粗略的估算，非常非常粗略的估算，但是是根据在一些可靠的统计数据之上。
Of that population, that billion dogs on the planet, about 10% of them live in people's homes and eat kibble dog food.
好，那在10亿的不该讲流浪狗地方品种野生犬，10亿的野生犬里面大概有10%左右的野生人类的家里，然后吃着干干。
So obviously that is a very small part of the population of dogs on the planet right now.
对不起，我可能要修正一下，刚刚所说的10亿是包含所有的狗，不分野外或是家庭饲养。那10%是家庭饲养的。那这个10%家庭饲养， 其实在整体的数量来讲是非常非常少的。也就是说，还有9亿的狗是生活在野外的。
So with that said, the other 90% of that estimated billion dogs, and again, we're talking about 900 million dogs on the planet right now, are not under human control.
也就是说，这9亿只的野生狗，目前是不在人类的管控之下的。
And that's probably a good thing because human beings aren't very good at breeding dogs that don't show up with a lot of genetic problems down the road. So we kind of need to keep that wild population intact.
好，9亿的野生犬只在外面流浪，也未必不是一件好事，因为从人类繁殖特定品种的历史来看呢，人类还没有办法能够繁殖出非常长久以来都能够健康优良生存下去的狗狗，所以我们也许也应该确保野外这个9亿的野生狗狗是这个族群是能够持续下去的。保育野生狗的概念。Sorry.
That's okay. I'm sorry. I don't want to step on your words.
No, I just kind of threw in my own interpretation in there.
Good. And I want you to do that. All right.
Okay.
The other thing I want to point out is if you're going to make this a comparison population to other canids on the planet, there are less than 500,000 wolves left on the planet.
500,000?
500,000 compared to 1 billion dogs.
OK，再给大家一个可以参考的数值哈，目前野生狼的族群在世界上大约剩下50万只，所以这是跟刚刚讲的狗狗大概有10亿只的差异，10亿比50万。
And unless that changes for wolves drastically in the next 50 years, they're probably going to go extinct.
好，那如果就是野狼、灰狼的族群在接下来的50年，没有再有戏剧性的变化的话，过了50年，这剩下的50万只也可能会走上灭绝之路。
So dogs in this wild population that we're talking about are again called land races, and that is the vast majority of dogs on the planet.
那再重新讲一次，我们刚刚讲的10亿只野生的狗的专有名词是叫做地方品种 （land races）。
And they usually are found around food sources.
那最常发现地方品种犬的地点就是食物资源很多的地方。
And they're divided into 2 classifications.
我们可以把它们大致分成2类。
One classification are the more social animals who are usually an animal that human beings are going to see.
那这第一类呢，就是他们比较亲人，就是人比较容易看得到他们。
That doesn't mean you can go up and pet them. It just means that they're visible.
这不代表说亲人，不代表说你有办法接近他们，或者是碰得到他们，只是说你看得到他们。
Depending on what country you're talking about, they could be hanging out in restaurants, around hotels, and places like that where food scraps or generosity from tourists may support their need for food.
Okay. 依据国家或是地区来看，这些所谓比较亲人的狗，它可能会出现的地点包含餐厅，甚至旅馆，或是任何一切有可能产出食物残渣的地方，或也有可能是在野外食物资源比较丰富的森林里面。
Some populations that are less likely to be seen by humans will hang around garbage dumps and places where people throw refuse, trash.
Is it still the first classification?
No, the first class are animals that you might see in the city wandering around. The second one, they stick more or less to a kind of a hidden life where they're hanging around usually
偷偷摸摸，但所以它可能会出现的地方就是，比如说像垃圾场，或是小巷子，或者是垃圾掩埋场等等的。
These animals that hang out in a more secretive life rarely adopt a human as a companion.
那像刚刚讲到这第二类比较倾向回避人的，比较倾向会回避人的狗狗，通常就比较不会能够习惯跟人住在一起。
I was looking at a population of feral dogs that live in the Mexico City dump in Mexico.
Sorry, can you say that again?
I'm going to give a little story about dogs that live in the Mexico City dump.
好，那我曾经在墨西哥的垃圾弃置场有遇过这只狗。
Mexico City dump is a mountain, literally a mountain of trash.
好，那这个墨西哥的垃圾弃置场呢，真的是像山一样高的一座垃圾场。
There is more food in that dump for the wild population of dogs than they could ever eat.
那在那座垃圾山里面的食物资源，狗可以吃的食物资源啊，大概比世界上就那个量大概就是你会觉得就是世界上所有的狗都聚集在那边也吃不完。
So the dogs there don't have a problem with food. They have a problem with water and heat.
好，所以那边的狗狗它们面临的问题其实不是食物资源不足，反而是水源还有暑气。
Because the Mexico City dump is in the middle of the desert.
因为墨西哥的垃圾弃置场的位置刚好就是处在沙漠正中央。
Any water that comes into the dump is brought in by humans.
所以唯一的水源来源就是人类带进来的。
Any shade that shows up at the dump is usually a pile of trash with that's leaning in a particular direction that allows a shade patch to show up during parts of the day.
然后在那座垃圾场里面，唯一可以提供遮阴的地方，那种机会大概只有在某一些特定的垃圾被带进来，然后丢弃的位置角度刚刚好，就是可以在一天当中的某一个时段制造出那一小块阴影供狗狗躲藏。
This is indicative of the niche that particular dump is in.
所以这个就是稍微跟大家叙述一下这个地方的生活环境是什么样子。
There are other places in the world, such as in places in Africa, that are identical to how this works for the dogs.
那在世界上有其他一些地方，比如说非洲，也有一些非常类似酷似这种垃圾山的生活环境。
So any shade pocket that shows up in a place like this is usually being controlled by a human that also wants to get out of the sun.
好，所以在现场能够有阴影的机会呢，就是必须要仰赖人类，因为人类也想要躲避太阳，所以人类会去移动垃圾，会去创造出阴影空间。
These people that are at the dump are typically workers there. They're either somebody who actually works to move the trash around, or there's people that are collecting scrap of some sort.
好，那在那边出现的人类有两种，第一种是他是垃圾场的员工，所以他可能需要搬运垃圾，他可能需要去做稍微的一些清理空间或是 相关的搬运工作。那另外一种是他可能是那叫什么拾荒者，他会去收集一些垃圾。
The vast majority of these people do not live at the dump, they work there.
所以大部分在那边出现的人并不住在那边，而是他们在那边工作。
And depending on what they scrap, they typically leave every day or every few weeks, depending on what they're collecting.
OK， 所以看他们是在收集什么样的垃圾，或是做什么样的工作，他们可能每几天或是每隔几周就会离开。
So what the population of dogs that live at the dump have adapted to is that they adopt these humans when it's necessary.
所以这些地方品种的狗狗就会学会在必要的时候可以去适应人类。
The vast majority of dogs around the world no longer regurgitate food for their pups.
全世界来讲，大部分的狗已经不会为他们的幼犬去就是 regurgitate
Throw up.
对，我不知道专有名词，但是就是母犬，我们以前在学的时候，就是母犬会喂食幼犬的时候，都会把胃里的东西吐出来。
The normal life cycle of a canid pup, and I'm not talking about dogs here, I'm talking about wolves, foxes, coyotes, the whole genre of canids is very specific.
Specific at regurgitating?
There's a very exact way with which they raise pups.
But not dogs.
No, dogs have been augmented.
OK， 好，所以就是大部分的狗其实不会靠反刍来喂食它们的幼犬。
So when a wolf pup or a coyote pup is born, one or both of their parents are responsible for getting them into reproductive readiness. In other words, old enough to reproduce.
那在灰狼，就是野狼、灰狼或是郊狼，在灰狼或是郊狼的繁衍当中呢，在幼狼出是妈妈，其中一个会负责把它们抚养到性成熟。
So for anywhere between the first the first two, it would be the first couple of days until the pups are usually somewhere around 10 weeks. Mom is nursing them. She's breastfeeding.
Okay, so again, with wolves and coyotes?
Yes, from the time they're born until they're about 10 weeks old, they're being fed by mom exclusively.
好，所以在灰狼跟郊狼的状况中呢，在幼犬出生后大概到10周龄左右，都是由妈妈哺乳，所以这段时间爸爸是不参与的。
And depending on the species and the niche they live in, dad is usually bringing food back to mom so she can tend to the pups.
那这是那个物种或者是他们的生存环境可能会有一点差异，但大部分爸爸的工作呢是去把食物带回来给妈妈，让妈妈可以哺乳或是喂食幼犬。
So at about 10 to 12 weeks of age, these pups now have teeth and they're sharp, and mom no longer wants to feed them.
那当幼狼成长到10周到12周左右，它们开始长牙齿，然后这时候新生的牙齿都非常尖锐，所以妈妈就不太会想要再让它们就是吃奶。
So the pups develop a behavior where they will profusely lick at the faces of the adults, which will cause the adults to regurgitate, to throw up whatever is in their stomach.
那所以在母狼不再哺乳幼狼之后，幼狼就会发展出一种特定的行为，就是他们会去舔舐成犬或成狼的嘴巴，然后这时候爸爸或妈妈或是叔叔伯伯阿姨等就会把他们胃里的东西吐出来给他们吃。
And many animals across the species, including birds, feed their young by regurgitation by this method.
那在其他的世界上许多其他的物种，比如说鸟类，也都是用反刍的方法去喂食他们的小孩。
And this gets the pups in a wild scenario, such as wolves or coyotes, from that nursing stage into the stage where they're actually big enough and skilled enough to cooperate in hunting.
所以这样子的，像这个阶段的喂食行为，就是等于是给幼犬一个在野外的一个适应期，直到它们能够长得够大、够成熟、够强壮，去一起协作打猎。
In some species of wolves, this regurgitative feeding can go on for almost a year.
那在某些地方的情况下，比如说灰狼里面，这种靠反刍来喂食幼狼的时间，可能可以长达1年左右。
Now, as I told you, dogs no longer do this regurgitation.
那像我刚刚也提过的哈，在狗狗不论是流浪狗或是宠物犬里面，这样子的反刍行为并不会出现。
There are individual dogs and individual types of dogs that still carry on this behavior, but the vast majority of dogs on the planet do no longer will regurgitate when the puppies do this food begging, this face licking behavior.
对不起，我刚刚翻译地方有错哦，就是某一些特定的品种或是某一些个体还是会保有这个特殊的行为，就是当幼犬来舔它的嘴巴的时候，它会反刍，但是绝大部分的狗已经不会再对幼犬舔舐脸颊这件事有所反应。
And I want you to keep this face licking behavior in the back of your mind the next time you see a pup profusely licking your or somebody else's face. Those aren't kisses, they're usually hungry.
好，所以大家可以记得舔舐脸颊这个行为哦。下次当你看到或是你自己家的小狗来舔你的脸颊、舔你的嘴巴的时候，它其实不是在亲你，它是在告诉你它肚子饿了。
So if we go back to the dump scenario, these pups are now 9 to 10 weeks old. They're fat and sassy because mom's been feeding them well, but now mom won't feed them, and the puppies cannot compete with the adults for food, water, and shade.
好，所以我们再把场景拉回刚刚那个墨西哥的垃圾场哈。那当地的幼犬长到大概9周龄、10周龄的时候，它们已经被妈妈喂养的白胖胖、肥滋滋。那这时候妈妈也不太开始渐渐断开它们的喂食行为。那这些小狗它们其实并没有，因为没有那个反刍，刚刚说的那个反刍的转换期，没有时间让它们习惯怎么样跟成犬一起打猎。所以这些小狗它并没有能力去跟大狗竞争抢食物。
In fact, these adult landrace dogs will furiously attack a pup that tries to get water or shade from them in a place like the Mexico City dump.
好，所以不只是食物，甚至是包含是水源或是阴影这种可贵的资源。在地的成犬。其实，如果小狗想要去尝试取得这些资源的话，成犬甚至是非常有可能就是带有非常严重敌意去攻击这些小狗的。
The mortality rate of these pups between the time they're about 10 weeks old until about 2 years of age is about 95%. In other words, 95% of these dogs will die.
好，所以就是在幼犬发展从9周龄开始，就是开始断奶，9周龄到大概2岁左右，这段期间的幼犬死亡率高达95%。
But the dogs have come up with a very interesting strategy on how to get from that puppy stage to the adult stage without having to compete with the adult population of dogs.
所以在这种特殊的情况下，那生物也会自己去演化适应。在地的幼犬就发展出另外一种行为或是机制，让它们可以在不用跟成犬竞争的状态下，也可以存活到成熟的年龄。
It's real simple. They adopt a human.
非常简单的策略就是他们去适应人类，他们不要去跟成犬竞争，但他们转而向人类求助。
So oftentimes these workers, as they leave the dump, have these pups following them.
所以刚刚讲的这些工人们啊，或是在那边拾荒的人类，等到他们离开那个垃圾场的时候，通常都会有1只2只小狗跟着他们离开。
Oftentimes there's no leash. The dog does not have a name. Nobody's calling it. It's just following the humans.
就是就算没有牵绳，或者甚至狗狗根本没有名字，也没有人叫它们的情况下，这些狗狗们就会跟着人类很自然的离开。
And oftentimes when the humans go in the house, these dogs will hang out around the outside of the house.
那当人类回到自己的家中，这些狗狗就会徘徊在那个人家的附近。
Humans will feel sorry for them, especially women, and they will give them food and water.
OK， 所以在这种情况下呢，有一些人特别是女性就会觉得啊，他们好可怜哦，就会给他们食物，会给他们水。
In some cultures, especially in Africa, it's not unheard of for a woman to breastfeed one of these pups.
那在人类社会里面，当然是不可能让人类的女性去哺乳这些幼犬的。
In fact, in some cultures, if your wife can support a child and a dog, you have a really good wife.
假设你有一个你娶了一个女性然后她的乳水足够喂养一个小孩，同时又可以再喂养一个幼犬的话，那你真是娶到一个非常厉害的太太。
So going back to Mexico, these dogs that venture back and forth with humans from the city population and back to the dump, this continues until the dog reaches adult size.
那这些狗狗就会，这些幼犬，刚讲的青少年犬，正确应该是青少年犬就会跟着这些工人，在城市住家跟墨西哥垃圾场之间来回往返，直到他们达到成熟，大概就是2岁的时间。
So when the dog can now compete with the animals at the dump, there is no need to follow the humans back and forth.
所以当狗狗已经成长到够大够强壮，可以跟垃圾场的成犬竞争的时候，它们就不再需要跟着人类。
Typically, they'll find a source of food, water, and shade and fiercely defend it from older dogs that no longer can do that.
那这时候就换成这些年轻犬的天下，他们会找到他们的水源还有阴影的资源，然后就会把那些资源占为己有，然后非常凶狠的把那些原来凶他们的一些老狗全部都凶走。
Now, interestingly enough, most of the land races that are adopted by humans are the dogs that are making this transitional trip from the place they were born to the place they're being fed, and some human decides they're going to keep them.
那当然也有一些情况之下，就是在狗狗每天跟着这个工人，或是每周跟着工人这样在住家还有工作地方来回往返的时候，也会有一些家庭就觉得我就把狗狗留下来待在家里好了。
In my experience, the dogs that I've seen that people have quote unquote rescued from some country where it's a land race, that it was a pup that was starving to death and they thought they would intervene and save its life.
Sorry, can you phrase that again?
most of the dogs that I've seen that Americans have adopted that were a land race, they usually found a dog that was older than 12 weeks, younger than 4 months, that was starving to death on the streets.
好，所以在美国，他观察到的情况就是，这些被纳入家里的狗，通常是12周龄以上，但4个月以下，然后饿到快死的那种狗，就会被收养进家里。
And so they intervene and save the dog's life, but they don't realize that the gene pool that they just saved an animal from is not a pet population.
Okay. Oh, okay. Ken, before I continue translating, do you think you can adjust the volume of your microphone?
Down?
Down a little bit.
Yeah, I got a booming voice.
That's very nice. I admire booming voice.
Let me see if I can figure out quick and easy how to do this.
There's a microphone icon at the left bottom
I
corner.
see it.
Yeah. You can go ahead and say something.
I'm gonna try. Let's see if I go again here.
大家有比较好吗？这样听起来。
So just let me pick it. I'll just try talking a little softer. I get animated, so it's my fault.
No.
Okay.
Okay.
So anyhow, these dogs that get adopted are typically a pup who's no longer nursing and isn't making, either it didn't adopt a human or it lost contact with an adopted human that was taking care of them.
Ken, did you say it was before? Did you say the dogs are up until 4 years old or 4 months?
4 months.
4 months.
The mortality rate for these puppies is really high between 12 weeks and about 16 weeks. Because if mom's not feeding them and they don't have another food source, they will die of dehydration before they starve to death in that time window.
所以对，在美国或是在墨西哥这边，大部分被领养的狗，就是被带回家的狗，就是大概在介于12周到16周，因为这时候就是大概妈妈没有在喂食，没有在哺乳，没有在继续喂养它们，那这时候它们就是大概都处在一个快要渴死或饿死的状态下，那人类就会把它们带回家。那但是比较可惜的是，通常人类不会发现说我带回家的狗其实不是一般认知的那种宠物狗。
So somebody will intervene for these starving pups, either a rescue group or an individual, and take them off the street, so to speak, and nurse them back to health.
那其实不只是在墨西哥，在大部分其他地方的国家也都是这个样子。那通常是可能是救援协会啊，或者是中途之家啊，或是一些比较有爱心的个人等等，他们就会把这些可怜的狗狗从街上带回家，然后把它们照顾到恢复健康。
Now the problem that comes into the picture is that this animal has come from multiple generations over possibly hundreds of years for living that feral life, not living in somebody's apartment or house.
好，所以大家要记得哈，我们这些狗狗，它其实在进入人类的家庭之前呢，大概已经经过了好几个世代，也就是大概有几百年的时间，是习惯这种在野外流浪的生活。
They are typically fiercely territorial,
那它们通常是有非常强烈的地域性，
especially with other dogs.
特别是针对其他的狗。
Now, I've seen them learn to cohabitate with another dog in the same home, but usually it's the neighbor's dog or a dog they encounter walking on the street that can turn into a disaster quickly.
我有看过一些这种被纳入家庭的野生狗，它们通常不太能够跟其他的狗相处。那当这时候如果是邻居的狗啊，或者是路上经过的狗，可能可以短暂的互动一下，但通常都会发展成不太好的结果。
They will also typically guard food and water.
它们通常也会对水或是食物有守护性，护食护水。
That can be trained out to some degree, but it really depends on the individual. I have seen feral dogs that would never give up the idea of guarding food.
这种护食护水的行为呢，可以透过训练减轻到一定的程度。But did you say it was, I missed out. Did you say it was impossible to like?
There are dogs.
Behavior?
There are dogs that, with a good trainer, you can train them not to guard, let's say, the food dish in the house. Okay, but I have seen dogs that even with a skilled trainer, that could not be done. In other words, you would feed them in a cage or put the food down and close the door and wait till they're done.
OK，所以这个情况就是，即便你有一个非常好的训练师，大概你可以训练他在家里不要守护食物，但是在换了一个环境之后，这个本能会比较强烈啦。
I have seen dogs that you cannot train them using treats with another dog present because they're constantly worried about the other dog getting the treats and they're not thinking about the training process.
我也看过我也看过非常多的案例，就是说，当要训练一个地方品种犬的时候，我先暂时用台湾米克斯，感觉大家会比较好理解。当我要训练一只米克斯的时候，如果旁边有另外一只狗在，然后我要用零食做训练，通常米克斯的脑袋没办法专心在训练程度，没办法放在训练这件事情上，因为他总是要担心另外一只狗会不会来抢他的食物，抢他的零食。
Now, there are training ways to get around that problem, but that depends on the skill set of the trainer, not of the dog.
有一些训练方式可以减缓这个状况，但这个要视那个训练师的技术要看这个训练师的经验跟技术啦，不太能够仰赖狗狗自己去做调整。
Now, I've trained both coyotes and wolves in a group setting, meaning there was more than one in front of me without any barrier between me and them. And with my skill set, I could keep the training session on track and the animals didn't compete with each other.
那我曾经训练过多于一只的灰狼，或是郊狼，就是在我面前可能有2只以上的灰狼，而在我跟动物之间并没有任何的阻隔。那我可以在这样子的训练环境之下，去好好的引导他们跟随我的训练课程，然后他们之间也不会发生争夺食物或是抢夺彼此资源、守护资源的这种状况发生。
Now, the other thing I want to point out about these land races that are adopted by humans is that they are incredibly intelligent. They are problem solvers. They are uber smart compared to the average pet dog.
好，那另外一个这个米克斯的特性呢，就是除了他们有非常强烈的资源守护意识之外，然后再来就是他们都非常的聪明，就是因为他们跟人类互动长期累积下来一些结果，那他们非常能够解决问题，然后也反应非常快速，比 大部分的品种犬还要来得更加聪明，反应快速。
In the hands of a skilled trainer, these dogs learn incredibly fast.
那在一个优秀的训练师的指导之下呢，这些狗可以学习的非常非常快速。
They typically do not like to do repetition.
然后他们有一个特性，就是他们不喜欢做重复的事情。
When you ask them to do the same behavior over and over, they typically think there's something wrong with how they're offering you the behavior.
如果你要求一只米克斯一直重复的做同样一个动作的话，他们通常会觉得说，是不是我做这个动作的时候哪边出了错误？
So when I'm working with trainers that have these kind of canid in front of them, I tell them to get it trained and move on.
所以当我有些客户他们就是养米克斯，那我就会告诉他们说，面对米克斯，你就是赶快把一项训练完成之后，他会了，你就赶快继续进行下一个训练项目。
You can mix it in with other known behaviors, but don't just stand there and ask the animal for repetition. It usually makes them crazy.
你可以在新的训练项目里面混入他们已经会的项目，或是已经会的动作，但是千万不要就只是站在那边要求他一直重复做同样的一个动作。
And typically their relationship with the trainer is one of mutual benefit. In other words, the trainer's having fun, the dog's getting some food or something else, and it's mutually beneficial to the animal. They're not looking at it like, oh, my human is playing with me.
然后这个在米克斯的眼里呢，狗狗跟训练师的关系比较像是双方互相合作达到双赢的这种关系，并不是说我的主人好像我的训练师好像在跟我玩，好像很开心这样，比较是就是我们有共同的，你有你想要的东西，我有我想要的东西，然后我们透过这样子的训练互动来达到彼此的目的。
So their independence from humans is usually pretty obvious from the very beginning.
所以他们其实跟人类的关系，其实他们对人类的依赖性其实没有那么的强烈，他们相对是蛮独立的。
Many times these dogs like to be around people, but they don't necessarily want to be in your lap.
好，所以米克斯通常都会会喜欢在人的附近待着，但不代表他们喜欢窝在你的腿边。
Many of them don't like to play games like fetch.
大部分的米克斯不是很喜欢玩游戏，比如说我丢你捡。
We've selectively bred a whole group of dogs to like to carry stuff in their mouth and be close to humans, and we call those retrievers.
那人类甚至有特别去针对这种你丢我捡的行为去培育出了一群狗，这叫做猎犬，比如说黄金猎犬。
A land race has never been selectively bred for these behaviors.
那地方品种犬啊，像米克斯这一类，他们并不是为了要强化某一个特定的行为而去被培育出来的。
So this is one of the things that I want people, trainers who work with these animals, to understand what it is you're training.
所以我通常都会要求训练师要先去想清楚，说你想要训练的到底，你想要训练还有你要训练的目的到底是什么。
In my career, I've trained about 65 different species of animals.
好，在我的训练生涯里面，我训练过将近65种不同的物种，65不同物种的动物。
The first time I ever trained a bison, a buffalo, I had to learn, can they see color? What can they see? How do they live with each other? who controls the herd, and a host of other things before I ever got in the back of a pickup truck and went out to work with one.
好，那就是刚刚说，除了你必须要想好你的训练目的之外，也要重新认识你要训练的这个对象。比如说，我曾经训练过65种不同的动物嘛，其中一种是美洲水牛，就是那个非常非常非常大只，然后很多毛，然后看起来整只都是咖啡色，常常会挡在路中央的那种。那在训练这只美洲水牛的时候，我甚至必须要从非常基础的问题开始问起，比如说，这只美洲水牛看得到颜色吗？它能够分辨的认知和语词是多少，或者是在这个群体里面是哪一只在控制这个群体等等非常基础的问题，我都必须从头开始慢慢认识它，我才能够安排我的训练。
I had to learn things like, unless there's a cow in heat, the bull doesn't matter.
Unless a cow is in heat. Oh, 好。
Ready to reproduce. Unless she's actually ovulating, the male, the bull doesn't matter to the herd.
好，甚至他必须从头学习，比如说在美洲水牛群里面，对这个群体来讲，一只公牛是完全没用的，除非有母牛正在发情。
But there is a dominant female, and you better know who she is.
但是在这个群体里面呢，会有一只，他们是母系社会，所以会有一只主要的大姐头，然后你最好搞清楚大姐头是谁。
Because if you have 6 very large female bison standing around the back of your truck, you better know who's running the show.
对，因为当你要把当我当时要把这一群美洲水牛再到特定地点去训练的时候，我后面站了6只母水牛，那我真的是最好应该要知道是哪一只会带头作乱。
And it's not the human.
绝对带头作乱，绝对不是人类。
I'm trying to control what's going on, but I'm not in charge.
那我试着要掌控整个的局面，但其实很可惜，事实上是那只领头的母牛在掌控整个局面。
Most of the animals I was working with were bigger than the truck I was in.
大部分我训练的动物啊，训练的物种，那个体型甚至比我的卡车还要大。
And they could easily flip it over anytime they wanted to.
然后，如果他们有那个意思的话，他们随时都可以把我的卡车翻过去。
So I had to know a lot about these animals before I ever went into the field to work with them.
所以，在我实地要踏入场域去跟他们互动，或是做任何的训练之前，最重要的第一步就是我必须要非常非常了解他们的一切。
So my purpose in this talk with you guys is that I want you to be completely aware of what it is you're trying to get this animal to do. And is it a domestic dog that happens to need a new home? Or is this a land race who some good-hearted person has decided to try to adopt?
所以我讲了这么多的重点，其实就是希望大家可以想清楚哦，你要训练的对象到底是什么样的一个对象？它是一个走失的，本来就是宠物犬的走失犬吗？还是它其实是像米克斯一样，有着特定的习性跟特定的个性？
And if you think you're going to train a land race like you're going to train a pet dog, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. And unfortunately, people can get hurt.
那如果你用训练一般品种犬的方式来训练米克斯的话，那很可能中间会出一些不小的差错，那甚至可能会导致你或是狗狗受伤。
And again, as I said in the beginning, I've trained a lot of land race dogs, including ones that have lived with me in my home without any problems or incidences, but my clients who are not professional trainers struggle with it.
那像我刚刚也有提过，就是我曾经也训练过不少米克斯，包含其中一只是我自己饲养过的，但是我也看过其他的朋友，他们饲养米克斯，但是却遇到非常非常多的困难。
If the client is looking for that clingy dog who's beholden to them all day long for their daily needs, that's not a land race.
假设你希望找的是那种陪伴犬，就是整天会扒着你啊、挨着你的那种，那种就大概跟地方品种犬是完全不一样的。
But if they want to establish a relationship with another animal that's extremely smart and extremely adaptable, you won't find a better one than a land race.
但假设你想要假设你是希望和另外一种不同的动物建立关系，然后这只动物既聪明又能够很快速的适应不同的环境生活的话，那米克斯大概是最好的选择。
In my home, I've been privileged to not only have as a companion, but to get to raise them from the time they were pups until they died of old age. I had 2 New Guinea singing dogs.
New Guinea singing
New
dog?
Guinea singing dogs.
Are those land races?
They're a land race.
OK，好，那在我自己的这个生命历程里面，我非常荣幸曾经饲养过2只地方品种犬，他们是我从小一路饲养到大，然后看着他们善终离开的2只地方品种犬。那这2只犬，在这2只地方品种犬在美国有一个特定的名称，叫做 New Guinea Singing Dog 啊，对 ，Yes， well someone just typed the correct name for me.
They're Canis helstrami. Canis helstrami is what they're called.
In Chinese, in Mandarin, it's 新几内亚唱犬.
Very good. The evolution of this particular dog is linked to your part of the country very tightly.
好，那这种狗狗的演化历史，其实跟台湾的地域是蛮接近的。
In Japan, these animals are known as Shiba Inus.
在日本呢，这种同样的犬被
As
称
you
为
move
柴犬。
as you move your way towards the equator, they change name. Poi dogs, koi dogs. There's a number of names for them, but they all have the same phenotype.
OK， 好，所以刚刚讲的这新几内亚唱犬啊，其实都是同一种犬，只是说在日本他们叫做柴犬，但一路往赤道移动啊，会开始出现不同的名词，比如说 koi 或是 hoid。
They're typically reddish in color.
大部分都是比较偏红棕色的。
They often have a white tip on their tail.
通常尾巴上都有一个白尖尾。
They have very short, pricked ears.
它们有非常短的立耳。
They have a very long needle nose.
然后比较长尖的鼻吻。
They are typically on the weight class of about 10 kilos.
然后体重大约落在10公斤左右。
That depends on where they come from. If you're in a mountainous area, they're smaller. If you're on a flat land, they're bigger.
那这个体重也是他们生长的区域而定。如果是在山区，通常比较小；如果是在平原区，体型会比较大。
As you move through the Polynesian islands and the Micronesian islands and eventually get to New Guinea, that's where they became called New Guinea singing dogs.
那比较靠近新几内亚的时候，他们就开始被称作新几内亚唱犬。All right, Ken, I have to give a reminder. It's 10 5:05 right now. So I think maybe you can leave about 15 minutes for
Absolutely.
for the public to ask questions.
Absolutely. Okay. And then finally, these animals some of them ended up in Australia where they bred with missionary dogs and became called dingoes.
哦，OK，好，那刚刚讲的这些狗狗呢，刚刚讲这种地方品种犬呢，在移动到澳洲的时候，就跟在地的另外一种任务犬去做了混种，那最后出来这种狗呢，就叫做 dingo。
So whether you're talking about the Japanese Shiba Inus or you're getting down into your part of the world where they're chin dogs, and then you work your way south till they become koi dogs, which means red, and eventually New Guinea singing dogs, and then dingoes, they're all an evolution of the same canid that followed man through that part of the world when the water table was low.
OK， 所以不管是我们刚刚讲的柴犬啊，还是不同地方的新几内亚唱犬啊，或是到了澳洲变成是这个dingo 啊等等的，都是一开始的演化都是从开始跟随人类，当在水资源或者是其他资源不足的时候，懂得学着要跟随人类而出现的特定品种。
And with that said, I would like to open it up to questions.
好，那讲到这里，大家有没有什么疑问？给大家一些时间消化哦。原来 dingo， 我自己是才学到说，原来 dingo 是真的是一种犬种。
大家都没有问题吗？
就是比如说，可能我刚刚翻译没有太清楚的地方，可以再请 Ken 再讲一次，然后我再翻一次。
那我问好了，我问，那我们台湾米克斯的福尔摩沙山犬，福尔摩沙山犬，那 Ken 怎么看
？So Ken, in Taiwan we have what we call Formosa mountain dogs.
Okay.
Do you have any insights about them?
I would need to see them and actually see the region they come from. Being a mountain dog, I would tend to believe they'd be on the small side.
Small size?
Meaning they're not going to be a 50, 60, let me see, a 15-kilo dog. They're probably going to be smaller if they live in mountains, if that's where they came from.
Okay.
Okay. The other thing you have to take into consideration with all of these types of dogs, these regional land races, is that the influx of humans that bring pet dogs into the area, they're going to breed with these animals, and you're going to get morphological, physical changes in them based on the selective breeding, the non-selective breeding that's going on.
好，所以Ken 是说他关于台湾米克斯的一些见解，他可能要先了解他的第一个他要先看到他们，然后再来就是他要知道他们的就是一开始是从哪里来的。那假设单纯从名字判断 Mountain Dog 山犬的话，他会猜他们体型通常比较小，就是不是到50公斤那种超巨大的犬，大概是15公斤左右。那另外一个就是也要看说这个台湾犬就是有没有跟人类带进来的品种犬有杂交混交的情形，因为这也会发展出不同的行为跟个性特色。
好，
有回答到问题吗？
有，因为其实这就是为什么我还蛮 坚持一定要让 Ken 实际来台湾的原因，因为我们已经安排了一趟行程，让他亲眼看到山里头的、都市里头的、收容所里头的、一般学生家里头、就客户家里头的米克斯们大概是什么样子。我相信唯有他看过、研究过、互动过，才可以给我们最精确的一些建议。那好，我们现在有看到一个问题，请问地方品种犬会在意其他狗有目的性和人合作，不爱玩游戏，可以从他们的生活中推论大致的原因。但请问训练时不喜欢重复同一个动作，有可能是因为什么原因呢
？So Ken, here's a question. Why do you think land races don't like repetition in a training setting?
It's a really good question, and I'm going to try to make it as short as possible. Okay.
好，那这个是一个非常好的问题，然后我会尝试着用最短的方式来回答这个问题。
One of my measures of intelligence in a dog is their ability to pay attention to details.
那第一个我想得到的可能有关的原因，或是他们的特色，是他们能够对非常他们会注重，他们能够对细节可以观察到非常入微。
So in my estimation of the animals that I train, specifically dogs, the ones that pay attention to little tiny details are the really smart ones.
那在我的训练经验当中呢，可以观察到，就是说，能够注意到这么细微细节的狗呢，通常就是非常聪明的狗。
So if you're training a really smart dog and you're changing some little aspect about the repetition you're asking them to do, they see the difference and think you want a different behavior.
所以也因为他们这么聪明哦，假设训练者在训练的过程当中，有意或是无意的针对同一个训练动作做出了些微的改变，可能是人给出的讯息有了一点点是些微的改变。那这么聪明的狗，如果它能够注意到这个细节，它可能认为你要的其实是不是不一样的东西。
And if the animal adapts their behavior response to some little change in your signalment, in the way you presented the signal to them, that's going to make the animal frustrated because they're trying to get it exactly right.
好，所以如果训练者没有注意到这一点的话，那狗狗可能会感受到挫折，因为他们其实是非常非常努力的想要回应你做出的每一个细节的差异，他们想要100%的回应你。
The first time I target trained a coyote, I learned this the hard way.
好，我第一次训练一只郊狼要做标定的时候，就遇到了非常非常重的、非常非常大的挫折。
I had a target stick that was about a meter long, and it had a little ball on the end of it.
那我用的标定物是一个大概1米长的棒子，然后那个棒子的尖端有一个橡胶球。
And the coyote immediately touched it, and I marked it and reinforced it.
然后第一次这个郊狼就立刻碰到那个标定物，然后我就立刻标定，然后给予奖励。
And I asked the animal to do it again, and this time they bit the end of the stick.
然后当我再一次要求他再做一次一样的行为的时候，这一次他不是去碰，他是去咬了那颗球。
So I didn't reward that, and I presented the stick, and they licked it the third time.
所以这次他咬的时候，我没有奖励他，我又再一次递出了那个标定物， 结果这一次他也没有咬，他反而是舔了一下那个标定物。
And I didn't reward that, and I presented the stick a fourth time, to which the coyote touched it with
然
its
后
nose.
好，那因为他舔，所以我也没有奖励他。那我又再把标的物再递出去的时候，这次他又再用他的鼻子去碰了那个标的物。
And I rewarded that, and then the coyote touched the shaft before the ball.
然后我就奖励了他那个行为，但是立刻的这个郊狼他就用他的鼻子去碰了，不是那个棒子的前端，而是去碰那个标的物的那根棒子。
And I didn't reward that, and then the coyote touched the air on top of the ball and never touched the ball at all.
然后当我再次递出这根标的物的时候，这只郊狼它就把鼻子，在它快要碰到那个球的时候，它就停下来了，然后就没有再碰到那颗球。
So at this point, the coyote showed me 6 behaviors and gotten 2 treats.
所以到了现在这个阶段呢，这个郊狼已经展现出6种不一样的行为，然后拿到了2次奖励。
And the coyote was getting mad.
然后这只郊狼已经开始非常不耐烦了。
And so I learned very quickly that once I had the behavior of touching the ball with your nose, to just move the target. Don't just keep sticking it out in front of him, thinking that he's going to give me the same behavior, because he's not going to do it.
好，所以我就这个事件，我就学到，当这只郊狼，当我把标的物伸出去的时候，然后郊狼用它的鼻子碰到那个棒子，那个球体，我要它碰的地方的时候，我就立刻给它奖励，然后我应该要赶快把棒子拿开，而不是一直摆在这边，因为一直摆在那边，它就会想说我是不是要做其他的行为。
So that's my story on, you gotta, when you have a really smart animal, you get the behavior exactly the way you want it, and then move on. Don't stand there and ask the animal to do it again and again and again, because they'll come up with a new variation.
好，所以这是我的故事啊，所以我就是从这个故事学到说，当你在训练一只非常聪明的动物的时候，当这个动物能够做到你要它做的那个行为之后，就要赶快去做下一个动作。
好，那个谢谢，我们来让另外一个问题也可以获得回答哈。小宝妈问说，护食护物老师会如何训练
？Here's another question. How would you train or change the behavior of guarding resources? That's kind of a big question.
It is. Well, first off, there are many, many ways to fix that problem. Okay. The way that I like to do it with land races is to teach them an incompatible behavior. In other words, I'm going to train them to do something around the food that doesn't allow them to guard it. And typically that's the backup.
Oh, that's only a backup?
Yeah. If you back them up 4 or 5 feet, toss them a treat so they have something in front of them, and pick the dish up, you can usually teach the animal pretty quickly not to guard the food dish from you.
Okay.
In that room.
All right. In a very particular setting. 好，所以先回答小宝妈哦，就是护食护物这个行为有非常多不同的训练方法。那假设是针对，我们先假设说是针对米克斯来训练的话，通常老师的做法是会教他在那个会发生护食护物的情况下，去教他另外一个跟这个行为不相容的另一个行为，比如说退后。因为当他退后的时候，他是要远离那个碗的，他就没有办法护食了。所以就是当他在做这个行为的时候，他没有办法去做他原本想做的行为。那当他退后的时候，可以立即给他奖励，这样至少他就可以学到说，在那样子的情境之下，在那样子的喂食时间、那样子的环境房间之下，他退后远离碗，不要去护着他的碗，是可以得到奖励的。希望这样有回答到小宝妈的问题。
I want to preface that by saying if the animal has already demonstrated that it will guard the dish, you need to add some management like a tether or something so that the trainer's safe. The animal can't, charge you and back you off the dish.
那假设你要训练的狗，它的护食行为是非常强烈的，就强烈到它可能会攻击或是咬你。那这时候最好再加一些安全的防护措施，就让你自己不会受伤。
I want to add that when I do workshops with trainers, I always show them the hierarchy of behavior change. There's a very scientific way with which we approach changing behavior. And I always go through those steps one at a time so everybody understands how you set up a behavior change protocol for the problem that you're looking at.
那关于改变行为这件事啊，其实就是 Ken 的意思是说，他可以再讲上一堂课啦，因为可以牵涉到就是从头去讲那个行为的发展跟机制，还有再怎么样去制定不同的训练步骤。对。
There's a very exact science to it, and I want all trainers that embrace science as a way of working with animals to understand that aspect of it. And it's very easy to follow once you understand how it works.
那这个就是现代科学的好处，就是一旦我们可以了解那个行为的发展模式，还有它的如何分析这个行为的话，要改变。当你习惯这个模式，分析这个模式的话，你往后在操作或者在制定训练步骤的时候都会快很多。
小宝毛问说还有护物吗？还有护物有什么建议？然后还有唐荣基你好，他说开课，那我来补敲完好了。那老师刚刚讲的这个课程有可能在线上进行吗？还是要实地进行比较好呢？
改变行为这堂课吗？
我先帮小宝马问后面那个问题，他说还有护物保护物品。
好，可以举个例吗？护物什么样的物？老师可能会比较好回答。小宝妈，你们家的宝贝会护什么样的物品呢？玩具吗？Sorry, we're trying to clarify a question here.
Not a problem.
护栏
就是护玩具吧。
护玩具吗？我看小宝妈讲话了没？
好像还没。
应该就是玩具。
玩具吗？
对。
好，so Ken, back to the question of resource guarding. If the resource is a toy, would there be a different training method?
Basically, no. I mean, if the toy, first off, you always have to look at what is the motivation for the animal to want the toy. Is it because it squeaks? Is it because they want to tear it apart? Or is it food, meaning they're going to consume it? It's rawhide or something like that.
OK， 所以如果是这个玩具的话，建议大家可以建议训练者可以先看一下，说这个狗狗想要这个玩具的动机是什么？是因为玩具会叫，还是因为他想要把它撕烂，还是说他把它当成食物，比如说是某种好吃的东西？那这个可能都会牵涉到不一样的切入方式，但训练的方式大概。Ken 的训练方式大概跟刚刚会是一样，就是去想办法教会动物，教会狗狗在那个环境下去做一个没有办法让它去保护这个东西的行为。
So if the toy is food, like a rawhide or a bone or something like that, I'm going to treat it just like the food dish.
所以如果这个玩具是一个可以吃的，比如说抗忧郁玩具啊，或是骨头，那我就会用同样的方法，比如说退后，让他离开那个让他离开他要守护的东西。
So, but if the toy itself makes a noise or feels good in their mouth or something along that line, I typically want to get an identical toy and teach them to trade.
那如果这个玩具是会叫，或者是咬起来很好咬，就很好撕啊，或者咬起来软软的之类的，那我通常会再去准备另外一个性质很相似的玩具，然后教他交换。OK 吗？And Ken, about how to analyze and changing behaviors, do you think is that something you can deliver as an online course?
Yes. Teaching the aspect of how to do that is definitely more of a lecture kind of thing, but the practical application of how to actually implement it is something that I found that really needs one-on-one look. The reason I'm saying that, it's very simple. There's 6 steps to it. You make sure the animal's healthy. You use some kind of antecedent arrangement. You manage the environment in some way. You positively reinforce the behaviors that you want. You teach them incompatible behaviors. And then as the list goes down, it gets a little more technical as to how you implement the other remaining 2 things that we have. Typically, I don't go past number 4. Okay. I typically don't need to. Okay. Now, if I have an animal in front of me, now we have to talk about how are you going to manage the animal? What's the incompatible behavior? And a lot of that's going to have to do with the environment, the animal, the motivation, dozens of other things that I can talk about in a lecture. But if you're learning to train, you really got to see it.
好，所以关于刚刚小鲁妈有问说，小鲁妈有帮大家问说，就是那个行为改变的这堂课有没有办法开线上课？那 Ken 是说，理论上就是单就理论啊，如何去分析行为这些东西是可以开一堂线上课。但如果假设你是希望能够实际运用在你的日常训练里面的话，那可能比较需要1对1的操作。那其实Ken 刚刚也大概透露了，就是在理论上改变行为，它会从6个面向来看。不过他刚只讲了4个哈。第一个是狗狗的基本的需求健康有没有被满足。第二个再来就是当这只狗在你面前的时候，你有没有做好环境管理。然后再来就是你要它做的一些行为有没有被正增强，有没有透过正增强的方式透过奖励的方式去增强这个行为。好，要他做你要他做的行为。那第4个就是遇到你不想要做的行为，你有没有办法教他一个替代行为？比如说刚刚我们在讲护食的时候，其实你可以教狗狗的替代行为，就是在食物面前后退，然后再给他奖励。那基本上只要有这4招都顾好了，比较就不太需要用到后面2招。但看刚没有讲后面2招是什么。
削弱的。
That was
Good
kind
job.
of long. Okay.
So, some of this has been pretty well documented. I'm a huge fan and friend of Susan Friedman, and
yeah.
I don't know if that's translated into Mandarin Chinese or not, but she has a really nice website that shows those steps in it quite clearly.
Mm-hmm. I've heard the name. Maybe I can search it out for everybody.
Susan Friedman is a retired professor from the University of Utah, and she is a behavior analyst. That's how you find her. Susan Friedman, PhD, behavior analyst.
Okay, I think I saw one of her online lecture before. 好，所以
She's
刚刚
awesome.
Yeah.
She's awesome. She's one of my mentors.
哦，好，所以 Ken 刚刚有讲说，如果大家想要知道刚刚那个行为的一些训练方法，有一个名称，也许我再找时间帮大家找出来哈。这叫他的名字叫 Susan Friedman，他是美国蛮有名的一个动物行为分析家，动物行为学家啦，但他退休了。
Her website is called Behavior Works.
他的个人网站，他的官方网站是叫做 Behavior Works。哎，这边 key 给大家。谢谢小龙妈。
It's been translated into several languages. I just don't know if Mandarin Chinese is one of them.
I don't think so. I haven't seen
Well,
it.
there's a job for you. Just to kind of give you an idea about the lecture aspect of this, I have a 4-hour lecture in English on management alone.
Wow.
Okay, and I've given that in 4 different countries, including in Japanese. Okay, so it can be done, and it probably can be done virtually, but we would need to break those groups down. There's a couple of them I can combine, but you'd almost want to look at a separate lecture for each one.
All right. 所以刚刚就是谢谢小龙妈，谢谢牛奶爸，在那个官方网站都已经贴在聊天室了哈。然后那个甚至关于这每一个议题都是一个可以开非常非常久的课啦。光是 Ken 的环境管理学，他就可以讲上4个小时。那他曾经在4个不同的国家、4个不同的语言去办过，那也可以办线上课。不过如果要这样办的话，可能需要重新调整一下。小龙妈，请问 IAABC 是什么意思？你说那个协会吗？
对，那个协会
有课程是吗？
就其实这位教授非常非常非常有名，然后跟他比较相关的协会，我记得之前台湾应该有分部代理，所以中文化的资料应该不至于太难找。我不确定，但是我想应该这个资讯不会太独特，太少有了。
了解。
那因为时间已经到了，现在是10点33分，我知道还有2个问题没有回答，而且大家应该还想要继续问问题，可是因为我们表定时间已经到了，所以或许各位可以直接跟 Ken 做联络，或者我们可能可以再讨论看看能不能中间办一些线上的交流会，或是甚至把整体完整的课程带进来，但这个一切都还要再讨论。那当然就是最希望我们台湾的疫情赶快稳定，然后美国那边看起来稳定很多了，我们可以实际见面的时候，我们有安排handling 就是操作技巧的工作坊，就是人一定要跟狗一起做训练，让 Ken 可以做指导的，那就可以真的学习到所谓训练的一些技巧。好，那我最后想问 Ken 一个问题，我想要请他告诉我们在防疫期间我们可不可以给我们一些建议，因为他们已经熬过来了嘛，可我们好像才刚开始。
关于哪方面的建议？说跟狗狗互动吗？
他怎么走过来的？他家里那么多动物，他怎么做到的
？OK， 了解。OK， so Sina just sort of summarized the lecture, and a final question is, do you have any suggestions for us in terms of staying at home during the COVID-19 epidemic with our animals?
Oh, excellent.
How did you manage through that?
Excellent question.
非常好的问题。
Actually, my hat here is is a program we have here in the United States called the Doggy Brigade. There are 80 teams that go into a pediatric hospital and visit the kids on a daily basis, and we've been doing it for 27 years.
哇，好，非常好的问题哦，就是刚好我这边这顶帽子上是一个组织的帽子，叫做 Doggy Brigade，有点像是一个疗愈犬的服务团队。那我 Avion Children Hospital，Akron，
yeah.
OK，Akron， 那它是就是我们sorry I forgot the numbers， 但是我们大概
we have 80 teams in the hospital.
OK，
and dog handler teams, and we've been doing it for 27 years.
27 years, OK.
So we're a very experienced, very well-oiled machine. We know what we're doing.
OK， 好，所以就是在这个团队里面，我们有80组的训练师跟狗狗队伍。那这不只是今年哦，还有过去27年来，我们都会定期到医院里面去陪伴病人。
So when COVID hit, all of those teams were barred from going to the hospital for now well over a year.
好，所以要当疫情这次新冠肺炎疫情发生的时候呢，我们这个团队所有的人跟狗就突然被禁止。
And these are highly skilled, highly trained dogs.
然后这些狗狗不是一般的狗狗，它们都是受过非常高度严谨的训练。
Who are now stuck at home sleeping on the couch.
那这些曾经非常优秀的训练工作治愈犬呢，现在都只能在家睡在沙发上面。
So we had a discussion. When I say we, the committee that oversees this program, we had a discussion about what should we do with these dogs during this hiatus, where they're not getting the kind of mental stimulation that the hospital provided them.
所以针对这个状况呢，我们这个组织的委员会包含我自己，我们就做了一系列的讨论说这些狗狗在没有办法像平常一样进到医院获得一些这个外界的刺激的情况下，我们该怎么帮他们找一些事情做。
So some of the suggestions were about physical exercise, and although I'm a huge fan of physical exercise for our pets, it's not enough.
那其中一些提出来的讨论建议是包含做这种身体物理性的运动。那虽然说我非常支持，就是我非常支持，我自己也非常努力推行让狗狗做很多的这种运动，但事实上就是单做这些运动是不够的。
So we developed a program of mental stimulation for the dogs that a lot of the people in the program really appreciated.
所以借此我们就在发展出了一系列的有点像是脑力活动给狗狗，然后后续的回响也都非常好。
So I was more interested in keeping their brains up to snuff rather than their physical muscles.
所以我个人是认为说除了肌力就是我们的身体之外，狗狗也必须要去兼顾那个脑袋的健康。
So I concentrated on exercises that exercise the prefrontal cortex, it's called the executive part of the brain of a mammal.
I will try. 所以我们设计的这个脑力活动其实是主要是针对大脑的。他讲了一个非常特殊的医学名词，主要是让我们的让狗狗的脑袋可以去活动啦，就是去执行某些事情的那个部位。
That's the part of the brain of a mammal that will deteriorate the fastest if it's not exercised.
那刚好这个大脑的部分呢，就这个特定的区域，也是假设没有使用它，会退化的非常快的一个区域。
So we had a variety of exercises, but 3 categories.
所以我们把这全部的脑力活动，做成了3个分类。
The first category was stay behaviors, where we asked the animal to either lay down or sit, or stay in a position for a period of time.
那第一个是第一个分类是去强化留置，就是 stay 的中文是什么？留置这个动作。
And this had to be done without the use of punishment if the animal didn't stay.
那就是动物可以是趴着或是坐着，反正就是用某一个特定的姿势让它待在原地，然后不可以用惩罚的模式，必须是用零惩罚的模式去达成这个行为。
We had 2 criteria. The first one was time.
那我们有2个标准，第一个是时间。
So you had to know your dog's attention span for this stay behavior period.
那时间是持久度的意思，所以你训练者自己本身要必须对你狗狗的专注的极限时间要非常了解。
And then the second criteria for the stay was exterior stimulus, things in the environment that would get the dog's attention to move from the stay position.
那第二个标准是外来刺激，就是比如说任何的刺激，可能是声音啊，可能是气味，可能是吃的东西，可能会导致狗狗离开那个 stay，就是留置的位置。
So the game was that we wanted the dog to make a decision: should I stay? Should I move?
所以这个就有点像游戏哈，就是我们要让狗狗自己决定，说我到底应该是动，还是我应该待在原地。
We highly emphasize that we want well over 50% of the exercises with the animal staying and getting reinforced for it.
所以我们希望狗狗的选择是，我决定留下来，我决定停在那边，待在那边，然后我可以吃到好吃的东西。
Once they got onto the game, we raised the criteria that we wanted 80%.
好，那一旦狗狗可以比如说在6次的训练可以做到3次，就50%之后，我们接下来就会提高要求，希望狗狗在5次训练里面可以做到4次，都留在原地。
The second exercise was to get the dog aroused, like tug or fetch or something that got the dog all fired up and all energized, and then ask them to do something where they became stationary, like sit or lay down.
好，那第二个练习，就刚是第一类，第二类的练习是会先跟狗狗玩一些游戏，比如说拉扯啊、拔河啊，或是你丢我捡啊，让狗狗的情绪嗨起来了之后，再要求他们做一些静止的动作，比如说坐下或是趴下。
So the goal was to get the nervous system all fired up and then get the dog to control that nervous system.
那这个练习，这个脑力活动的训练目标呢，是希望让狗狗把这些感官的神经啊，全部都嗨起来之后，然后要让狗狗再重新学会控制住那个情绪。
And as a lot of people learn, for a dog to inhibit an emotional response is hard to do.
然后像大家大概都知道，要让狗狗去学习控制住那个情绪是非常非常难的。
So just like in the first exercise, our goal was for the animal to get it right is at least 50% of the time, and then to raise that criteria to we want 80% correct.
那像刚刚的第一种训练呢，是先从能够达成50%，就是比如说10次里面有5次能够达成50%，然后再慢慢提高标准，就是要达到80%。
The last exercise we did was to give the dog cues with different sensory awareness. In other words, we would give the dog a hand sign, or a verbal cue or some other signal that we wanted a behavior and not always relying on multiple cues.
Single cues rather than multiple cues?
Well, the first criteria is that the animal understands how to do, let's say, a sit with a hand sign and the verbal cue, but it's not necessary that the dog has both.
OK， 好，
And then what we would do is mix up what the cue was. Sometimes I'd use a hand sign. Sometimes I would tell them what I wanted them to do.
OK， 好，那第3种训练呢是用不同的指令方式，可能是口令，可能是手势，可能是不同的暗示，让狗狗去做同一种动作。那这个的前提当然是狗狗已经能够知道那个动作，比如说教狗狗坐下，我们可能常常嘴巴讲，但是我们手大概也会有手势。那假设狗狗可以在这样的组合之下知道做，那下一步就是教狗狗如何只靠声音，只靠口令，或者只靠手势，或者只靠其他的训练者的暗示来做到同一个动作。
So you got to remember that these dogs are from a very highly trained, highly skilled group. And most of the dogs in the group knew verbal cues, they knew hand signs, and they knew how to follow targets. And so we would mix up what the cue was.
OK， 所以大家要记得，我们现在在讲的这些狗都是受过高度专业训练的狗狗，然后他们都听得懂口令，也都看得懂手势指令，也会跟随标的物，所以他们就会把这些不同的小动作、小指令全部都混在一起。
And so as I tell all my clients that you need to start with very short training sessions and increase the time duration of a training session based on the fact that the animal can continue to pay attention to what you want them to do.
那像我也会告诉所有的训练师啊，或是初学者们，就是一开始的我们设定的训练时间都不要太长，都从短短的开始就好。然后当狗狗的这个专注能力可以越来越长的时候，我们再慢慢拉长那个训练的时间。
So all 3 of these exercises are designed to give the dog more cognitive ability, more, let's call it attention span for lack of a better term. And we wanted to stay always within that span of what the animal could do.
那这些脑力活动的设计呢，其实就是希望加强狗狗的认知能力，或是他们这个专注力的能够维持专注的时间。那也同时在这个狗狗能够维持专注的时间内，去跟他们做去看看他们能够做到多少不一样的事情。
So in the beginning, the training sessions would be short, meaning maybe 2 or 3 minutes per session.
那这个也给大家一些时间上的参考，就是刚刚说的这个一次训练时间的长度呢，在初期短的时候，可能是单一训练的时间是2到3分钟。
And we would tell the owner to do
分钟，然后尽量去做短而多次的去做练习。
And typically, if the owner was doing this with their dog on a daily basis, within 3 or 4 days, we could increase the time of the session and decrease the number of sessions per day.
那假设饲主跟他的狗狗都可以用2到3分钟这样子，每天短而多次的连续做，每一天都做练习的话，大概过了3到4天，我们就可以开始把每一次训练的时间拉长，然后每一天训练的次数再缩短。
And typically we would go from 2 or 3 minutes to maybe 4 or 5 minutes.
那一次增加的时间也不会很长，从2到3分钟可能增加到4到5分钟。
And some of the other dogs could go from 4 or 5 minutes to 7 to 10 minutes in another week or so.
那有一些狗狗呢，大概在经过1个礼拜之后，又可以从4到5分钟的这个长度再就是拉长到7到10分钟。
And our goal was to get the dog up to about a 4 or 5 minute attention span because that's the average time they spent with a patient in a room.
那我自己个人的目标是希望每只狗的我的狗的那个专注力的维持时间是在4到5分钟左右，因为这也是之前我们去医院的时候，每只狗狗会跟病人花的时间，就是大概4到5分钟。
And as we are now transitioning the dogs back into the hospital, many of those dogs have retained the amount of attention span they need to have to go from patient to patient for literally 2 hours.
哇，好，所以让现在这个美国疫情开始缓解的时候的状况下呢，我训练师跟这个治愈犬又可以再度回到医院。那因为中间有了这些脑力活动啊，还有日常的训练练习，我们每只狗狗都还是可以维持每一次4到5分钟的专注时间。那一天下来，他们可能会花整个2小时，会花2个小时的时间在医院里面，一个病人接一个病人。
I did generate a handout for this exercise protocol that I can send to you, but it's in English, so you'll need to translate it.
好，那针对刚刚这些小的训练游戏啊，或是练习活动，Ken 是有做了一个简单的讲义跟手册，只是英文，但是他很乐意寄给大家。好的，小鲁吗？
好，
还在吗？
那感谢 Ken 给我们那么多的建议，然后给我们那么多宝贵的时间。那么我们今天就到这边，然后希望我们接下来还有机会可以跟大家多办一些线上的互动。那最希望是赶快可以跟 Ken 实际的见到面。好，
Okay,
那也
so
谢谢今天
Ken,
的
thank you very
人
much for your time and your experience and advice for us today. And we hopefully can invite you here to Taiwan very soon.
And it was my pleasure. I really enjoyed this. You guys had great questions. And I too hope that we get to see each other face to face again soon.
好，我也非常高兴今天可以在这边跟大家做一些简单的交流，也期待能够在很短暂的未来内就可以跟大家面对面见面。
好，谢谢，特别谢谢仁真，谢谢你辛苦了。
不会，谢谢大家。
好，拜拜。那我就
好，
关掉了，拜拜。
好，
拜拜。